Meath. Minister, thank you so much for being with us this morning. What is your view of whether or not, over the next 12 months, we can get a deal done?
Well, as you've said, I think my own view and my own party's view is that Brexit is really only at half-time. We have a huge amount of work still to do. I think it's very welcome, and I say this with a tinge of sadness. It's very welcome that the withdrawal agreement has passed through all the stages in Westminster. We know now that the European Parliament is recommending that it pass through, and yes, on the 1st of February, the UK will leave and nothing will change. However, the idea that we can negotiate a trade deal, one that is close, comprehensive, one that provides very little change for our citizens, not just in the UK and Ireland, but the EU as well, within about a 12-month space. It's very difficult. Now, of course, the EU is willing and ready. Michel Barnier is still our chief negotiator. He is working with his team and all member states, Ireland included, to ensure that we have a mandate and that we are ready for these negotiations when they start. But we do know, of course, that Boris Johnson has said he does not want to have an extension, which means trying to negotiate a very difficult trade deal essentially in 10 months. And we know, looking at previous trade deals, how long they have taken. But of course, as I've said, we are willing, we are ready. But we do need to make sure that in all of the negotiations, Ireland's priorities are heard, that the other 26 member states' priorities are heard, and that there is a level playing field, that we have a balance of rights and obligations throughout all of this.
Boris Johnson said on this programme of the agreement struck, an agreement which many people, in fact, didn't think was possible, that it allows the whole of the UK to come out of the EU, including Northern Ireland, and the only checks that there would be if there was something coming from GB via Northern Ireland and was going on to the Republic, then there might be checks at the border into Northern Ireland. I mean, that's not entirely true, is it? Can you envisage a border without checks?
Well, what we know is the withdrawal agreement that has been negotiated, the most recent updated version, is very clear. There will be no checks on the island of Ireland. We've been very clear on that. We need to protect the Good Friday Agreement, and integral to that has been the invisible border, which has existed since the Good Friday was put in place over 20 years ago. It protects the all-island economy, which has become, again, part of that cooperation and the involvement among our communities north and south on this island. With the withdrawal agreement and the technicalities of exactly how that worked, this will be discussed and this will be put in place throughout the transition period. But we do know that there will be some checks coming from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, and that is to ensure the protection of the single market. That's to ensure that any goods that are coming into Northern Ireland and then into Ireland and perhaps through the rest of Europe and into the single market, that the integrity of those goods are upheld. Of course, if we have a free trade agreement, if we have one that is so close that we do not need checks or that there are no changes, whether it be to tariffs or otherwise, then that obviously changes things. However, if we come to the end of this year, if there is no trade agreement in place, then of course the Irish Protocol will come into place, and all of the things that I've just outlined, protecting the border, protecting the all-island economy, protecting the common travel area, and of course the peace process, they will be very much at the heart of the Irish Protocol, which will come into play by the end of the year. But again, this is only if a free trade agreement is not negotiated. Our focus and our priority, and it shouldn't just be about timing, this idea that we need to get something done by the end of the year. For us, it's about putting the right negotiation, the right relationship in place, laying those foundations and making sure that we have a trade relationship, not just that benefits us, but that benefits the UK, because we want to continue to have that close relationship.
Indeed. Just a little earlier on in the programme, however, I put a question about divergence to the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, and she made it pretty clear that the whole point of this was to permit divergence. In those circumstances, if you are still in post, would Ireland veto any deal that permitted the level of divergence that Ms Patel was talking about?
Well, this isn't about Ireland vetoing any deal or any member state vetoing a deal. I think we're all in agreement, all 27 member states, that we want a close relationship with the UK. But there has to be, as I've said earlier, a balance of rights and obligations. There needs to be a level playing field. We need to protect not just the single market, but we need to protect the rights and the values that underpin our membership of the European Union. I think it is quite worrying that there's a lot of talk about divergence, but this is why, for us, and particularly in Ireland, the withdrawal agreement was so important. This is why the protocol, specifically on Northern Ireland, was so important. Without a trade deal which essentially deems it not necessary, we need to ensure that no border can ever be reconstructed on this island, that the all-island economy, which has evolved in so many ways, in everything from agriculture to our electricity market, to education, to health, that is protected. But most importantly, the peace process, where we have seen communities evolve, begin to work together, where we have seen peace for over 20 years, that is not impacted. And any kind of divergence in regulations without that protocol would mean a return to those kind of issues in the past. And that is why it's so important. As I said at the beginning again, it's not something that I want to see happen, the UK leaving, but for us what's so important is that you leave with a withdrawal agreement in an orderly fashion. And of course our focus now and our priority is to work with you as quickly as possible to try and negotiate a trade deal. But again, this should not be about timing, this should be about getting the right deal.
I mean, you mentioned a moment ago the all-Ireland economy. Excuse me. As of 11:01 on the 31st of October, in your mind, what are the prospects moving forward for a unified Ireland, for a united Ireland?
Well, we have always said, I have said in my government, and I think most political parties in Ireland are very clear that now is not the right time to broach that subject. Yes, I think the question itself has obviously become much more, it has come much more to the fore in recent years. However, our focus, and in particular this government's focus and our priority, has not been just to get through, as you say, and to manage an orderly Brexit. For us, we are only at half-time. There is a huge amount of negotiation and a huge amount of effort that is needed now to make sure that we get a good deal. And from, again, our government's point of view, our economy, the prospects for our economy will very much depend on whether or not we have a good relationship with the UK. The EU is still our largest trading partner, but for many business, in particular small and medium enterprise, the issue of north and south has been protected. However, our trade east and west between Ireland and the UK, that is an extremely important relationship, and we need to.
I hear you on that point.
Focus is around these negotiations, not that.
But if there were to be a ballot on a united Ireland, would you vote yes?
Again, this is not something that I think we should be discussing now, because I think what it does is create a further divide. We've seen how in Northern Ireland it's taken 3 years to bring our executive back, and our focus needs to be on making sure that our parties in the north are working well together, that we are upholding all of the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement, and that we're looking towards this next stage of the negotiations. As I've said, we're only at half-time, and I think now to start talking about any kind of a border poll or any kind of a referendum or that kind of a position would only actually be negative. So I think our focus needs to be on the next stage of the negotiations. There's a huge amount of work to do. The idea that we would negotiate a trade deal in 10 months, it's a huge challenge, and for some I think it's an impossible challenge, but something that we are willing and ready to do, and our focus needs to be on that, absolutely.
To torture the analogy briefly just for a second, we may well be at half-time in terms of the negotiations. I'd like to look forward to next season. Do you see the United Kingdom returning to the EU at any point?
Well, you know, I think all member states and I think most people in the EU would welcome the UK back tomorrow if that were the case, but I don't think that is the case, and I think we need to start focusing on what happens next. The 1st of February is not too far away. In fact, it's just a matter of weeks, and our priority needs to be on what kind of a relationship we will have with the UK. We need to ensure it's a close relationship. Ireland and the UK have had, yes, I think, a long and at times tumultuous relationship, but we are close neighbours, we are close friends and allies in many ways, as is the EU, and I think our priority needs to be on what kind of a future relationship we can have, how we can work together, not just in economic terms, but around security, and as I've said, protecting so many of those rights that underpin, and so many of those values that underpin the European Union: human rights, freedom of expression, equality of all for all persons. So we need to work together on that.
And Minister, whilst we have you, we learned of the death of Seamus Mallon, of course, Deputy Leader of the SDLP when the Good Friday Agreement was signed, Deputy First Minister in the Assembly. Your thoughts on his life and legacy?
Well, I think his legacy is here for many people to see. I think he played such a significant and important role in bringing about the Good Friday Agreement, but in bringing people together and communities together. And I think the fact that the Good Friday Agreement, albeit we've had challenges in recent years, I think it's only growing stronger. And I think his vision for Northern Ireland, his vision for Ireland and our relationships and communities in the North is one that will live on for a long time. And I offer my deepest condolences to his family, to his friends. I think his legacy will live on for a long, long time.
Helen McEntee, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.